Hedges are important corridors for wildlife because they are an artery that runs from one point of habitat to another. So this is a safe motorway, if you like, for mammals, bird species and insect life along from one point to another. The importance of having food available all throughout the length of that hedge is, if you think of a creature is only that small, most of the things that live in this hedge, their metabolism requires regular feeding, so they're going to need sustenance and food. It also allows, if you've got available food sources from one end to the other, it means you can actually physically have more animals. And so if that wood is the beating heart or the lungs, the hedge is the artery.
I'm stood in front of a hedge that we laid Christmas 2021, which is now about 16 months ago. What you can now see is a lot of this coppice growth is growing back, and we're going to cut that off with a tractor mower at some point next winter, because we don't want the hedge to get really overgrown again, because this grassy bank that's on this side is of as much value to the wildlife that live in the hedge as the woody part of the hedge itself. This strip is put here specifically for pollinating insects, so the plants in it are plants of high value to pollinating insects. It has another value, which is that it is somewhere for the small animals to come out onto on a wet day and dry off and catch the sun. These animals are then in a corridor between this tussocky grass and this wild bird cover strip. This strip was put here for the little birds through the winter, so they've got shelter and a restaurant all on the same spot. It's important to put the mix right next to the hedge, because the birds that live in the hedge can come out straight into the strip and find food. They can go back into the hedge and find shelter. They'll roost in the hedge at night. They'll feed in the strip in the daytime. The two complement each other.
This sort of hedge here is the sort of hedge that we would say is not well maintained, and that's largely because it's a boundary hedge. And the current government grants insist that the farmer has control of both sides. So he doesn't, because that's where the neighbouring farmer is. So this is particularly sparse in the bottom, and it's losing some of its potential. If you ask why this is a poor hedge, get down to the height that the wildlife, the grey partridge that's going to be looking through here, and it's a clear run through. There's nothing for it really to shelter in the lee of that from either predators or the elements. So therefore this is lacking in being an effective hedge. Laying or coppicing rectifies that, because that thickens it up again from the bottom, and then you've got your building block of how you can work on with that hedge.
A beetle bank is a good option for breaking up a big field. They provide corridors for wildlife to move about the countryside. They provide hibernating habitats for insects. They provide nesting habitats for some ground nesting birds. They offer lots of the benefits to wildlife that a hedge do without the commitment to planting a hedge. This one has been put in alongside a 24-metre wide wild bird seed strip, so it provides seeds for the farmland birds all the way through the winter as well. There is more and more research being done into predatory insects that eat aphids, such as ladybirds, that use these banks. I believe that these insects only move about 50 metres out into the field from the bank, so the more banks there are across the field, the more field there is that you wouldn't need to use an insecticide on. It's good all round, win-win.
This hedge was laid this winter, and you can see here how hedge laying works is that the pleaches, the stems of this hawthorn were cut through, not all the way through, so the sap can still rise, and you can see it started to bud out all the way along its length, and from the cut heel down to the bottom that started to coppice out too, which in a year or so's time will make this hedge incredibly thick and dense, and will manage it so that the height is not such that it excludes the light from this ride here. so that the wildflowers can once again burst back into life, but that'll be a windproof barrier that'll encourage the birds and the mammals that live within the wood. They'll all of a sudden be much more snug. They're going to be more happy. A pheasant or a dunnock or a great tit is just like you and I. He doesn't want to get cold and he doesn't want to get too wet, and he'd like a bit of sun on his back. Scrub like this has a huge benefit to nature. This is almost a lost habitat in much of Suffolk because there's no cash value in it, but there is huge value to wildlife. So some farmers and landowners might think about ripping all this out and planting trees within it. They might think about returning it back to farmland. But this is home to a huge number of bird species. Wrens, robins, thrushes, blackbirds. Chiff-chaffs make their beeline for here immediately as soon as they return back. So for bird life it's important. For the ground nesting birds, the wild pheasants, they love nesting in here. It's obviously home and shelter as well for rabbits, small mammals that are in this tussock grass. They use this and then shelter under the lee of that. It's an absolute gem, and more is the pity there's not more of it. But there's not a grant that would ever pay you to produce this. Little glade and a great big bank of blackthorn scrub, hawthorn and maple.
Behind me was a line of fir trees. We cut them off at about 10 foot because we planted wood inside the field that they surrounded, and the idea was to let light into the bottom of the wood to the new trees. What we've discovered is that the goldfinches have gone absolutely mad and they love it in here, so we've left it alone. But it's a good indication of how a mosaic of hedges across the farm is of benefit. Our aim really is that if there's 20 hedges on the farm, we have 20 different types of hedge. Every type of wildlife needs a different habitat. They're all unique. So we try and make sure that every element of the farm is slightly different. We do not want anything that resembles a monoculture. We don't want no two things the same. As a young hedge grows into a middle-age hedge, it grows into an old-age hedge, we're trying to manage the hedges in rotation, manage the woods in rotation, so that there's something at every different growth stage, at every level of its life, so that no two things are the same, and what might be a good hedge for one sort of wildlife will grow out and become a bad hedge for that sort of wildlife, but there's another one to take its place straight away.